So, as I said, we're going to talk about politics and public policies and cultural support as an antidote. And the question is, is the antidote to what? We have a panel where we have people who have been either or are in positions where they can make a difference, either, in a parliament or in government or through organizations, international organizations, or people, academics that have been working with rights holders to try and push some projects that would benefit creators. So I'm not going to introduce Sylvie once again, but she has joined us here. Next to her is, coming from Greece, is Irini Stamatoudi, who was the head of the Copyright Office in Nicosia, is that correct? Greece, and who is one of the copyright experts that has also worked alongside CISAC in the frame of copyright collective management organizations in Greece. And I would leave it at that. Let's say that you were involved with Autodia and the changes that happen in Greece. Next to you is Sam Ricketson, who is an expert in copyright and creators' rights, coming from Melbourne, and a huge advocate of the resale right for visual artists, if I'm correct. Next to you, coming from here, but also from Brussels and Strasbourg, the triangle. And Emma Rafowicz is a member of the European Parliament, and she has been very, very busy recently with Axel Voss on the AI report, but also more recently on a fascinating 141 pages document. And I really invite you to read that if you are interested in that where she outlines how European cultural budget called Agora EU should be spread among the different cultural sectors. And I think it pleased a lot of people in this room when you ask for a specific culture music strand that would benefit the music sector in the same way that the media program benefits the audiovisual sector. I think just for that, I think you deserve some applause, don't you? What do you think? Oh, cool. Next to you, coming from Addis Ababa, a city that very few people know that, but I lived in for 6 years in the 70s. Angela Martins is a head of unit at the African Union. I still remember the building, which is not too far from the Emperor's Palace, if I remember well. And last but not least, someone I had a drink yesterday, and I had to tell him that it was the first time I had a drink with a Lord. So Lord Kevin Brennan comes from Wales and has been in government, parliament for most of his professional life, and prominently known for the work you did at the House of Commons. And I can tell you that he's probably the best interviewer and probably has been a prosecutor in a previous life, because the way he roasted record companies during the inquiry on the functioning of the music industry in the UK was absolutely impeccable. As a journalist, I was like, respect. And I'm going to start with you, Kevin. Why and how did you decide that you were interested in... Oh, by the way, I forgot to mention, he's also a musician and plays in a band. Why did you choose to focus on the creative industries in the first place?
Well, I suppose as you said, I've always been a musician, although not of the prominence of many of those who are here today. And I was in a band when I was a member of Parliament. We were called MP4. We were legends in our own imagination, and the greatest parliamentary rock band in the world and the only one actually at that time, as a matter of fact. But I always started from the premise that ever since somebody said to a musician, sing into this horn and I'll give you $1, musicians have been ripped off and songwriters have been ripped off. That's my view and always has been. And I think whatever technological change comes along, there's an element of that going on. And in Parliament, I took an interest. I was first elected to the House of Commons in 2001. And I just took an interest in this industry. And of course, when it's first presented to you, it's presented to you in such a way that it seems extremely complicated. In fact, far too complicated for a mere MP or a politician or even a musician to understand. So it's best just to leave it to the experts. But of course, if you do that, what happens is that suddenly you wonder where all the money went. And so I took an interest right from the beginning in that and actually did an industry and Parliament trust period of time where I went around the music industry and spent time with publishers, with musicians, with collective management organizations, with record labels, all sorts, and tried to understand really what was going on under the hood in the wiring of the music industry. And I came to the conclusion that, every technological change that comes along, it's always the creators who seem to be locked out of the room and others are taking the decision on their behalf. And so I've made it my mission in politics to try to educate some of my colleagues about this subject, but also to advocate for creator remuneration. And my central message would be, and I take it from this conference, is that it's really important to engage with policymakers, and it's really important to build allies within national parliaments, within governments and so on behalf of creators. Because when you do that, actually, as we heard earlier on, when you do it and when you get close to policymakers, they are all actually quite interested in musicians and artists and what they do. They all have their favorite musicians and artists. They all have family members, some of whom might want to become creators themselves, but they don't necessarily understand, because what they hear so often are voices of large corporations who have other interests at heart rather than the voices of creators. So I think it's absolutely vital that everyone here, particularly with this new challenge of AI, gets together, acts collectively, use your collective organizations, and engage with policymakers.
Emma, same question. Why choosing to be interested in, that rather than, I don't know, oil and...
Well, that's important as well. I don't have the luck to be a musician or to have a band, even though, now that you talk about it, I think maybe we can create one in the European Parliament, but I'm not sure it's going to, compete. And no, more seriously, when I became an MEP, a member of the European Parliament, I knew really quickly that I wanted to work for culture, because I do believe that today, but it has always been the case, I think, culture is a place, actually, where the political battle that we are living in is, I think, one of the most concrete. I think that when you are working for culture today, you know that you are actually working for democracy. What we are seeing here and today in Europe, all over the world actually, is that within culture, within the debates that you guys have right now, what's actually happening is a battle between the rule of law and reactionary forces who are actually wanting to take that down. When we are talking about AI, when we are talking about the dignity of workers in culture, when we are talking about the fight that artists are leading today with platforms, with big tech, the subject behind that is, are we willing to fight for democracy? And since I believe that democracy is really in danger right now, I decided to fight for culture. And you are scaring me with the lights, to be honest. You don't even need to be a musician to have all the lights. I feel like Dua Lipa somewhere. It's really impressive. But really, and I can't even see you, to be quite honest. So it's really impressive. But I really want to say that I feel like when I came to the European Parliament, I was so frustrated, but also as an activist, because that's what I still am. I feel like nobody is talking about culture enough. That in the European Parliament, culture is something, it's the last debate on the table. It's the debate that you have at 9 p.m. when you have talk about everything else. But I do believe that it's actually the backbone of democracy. It's the backbone of our parliamentary lives, and it's the backbone of France, of Europe, and of the world. Today in Europe, we are being attacked. We are being attacked by Putin's Russia. And the first thing that he did, actually, when the war began, when the invasion happened, he decided to destroy the theater of Mariupol. And I do believe that the battle that we are having today with reactionary forces is cultural. And that was a long answer, but that's why I'm really happy to be with you and to fight alongside you.
Yeah, that's going to be a tough act to follow. Who wants to follow? Irini? Why did you get interested in this field and to start with? Yep.
I think that lawyers that deal with copyright are usually failed creators. So I guess at some stage of my life I want to be a creator, and I ended up being a copyright lawyer, I guess. I hope I do that better than the other part. So I would say that today the problem is that policymakers sometimes engage into something without having a true connection to the actual creators. So we have lobbyists, we have policymakers, but we also have creators that they do not sometimes participate as much as they should in this process. We need to actually know what creators need themselves, not how this need is interpreted or assumed by lobbyists, etc. So I think it is very, very important when we have people, as the two people we already heard, that they try to engage, in fact, in applied culture. I say that because I was at a policy post as well, and sometimes I saw that one main issue was that not all the stakeholders agreed. And I think this is also an issue today. I think we would have achieved a lot more if we were all in unity and if we were all coordinated instead of having different views, each one of us, as to how we need to solve the problem. So I think somehow CMOs and creators and policymakers perhaps that want to be active in this area, they need somehow to coordinate and decide as to what is the best way forward. And I think that there we do have a problem, in my view.
Okay, we'll get back to that. I want to finish with Sam and then Angela. Do you decide one day that you want to do copyright law, or did you want it to be a guitar player like Jimi Hendrix?
No, well, that would have been a good thing to aim for, I suspect. And I should just mention, we did have a rock musician who was actually our Minister for Arts for a number of years. That wasn't so good for the classical musical industry, apparently. Anyway, now my interest in copyright goes back to my academic interest, which was to look at the history and development of the Berne Convention and authors' rights. So I've done that for more than 40 years. But then I also was in practice a little later and acted for creators. But I hasten to say the creators that I acted for weren't necessarily the musicians and artists who are represented here, but were people working in more mundane areas such as design and industry. But these are issues that I think one becomes very aware of, and the need for authors to be protected. Can I just mention one thing that came out of the previous session. One of the issues that we seem to be confronted with is how to deal with the fact that there's going to be a large volume of subject matter on the market which has no identifiable human author, leaving aside the question of how it got there. And that is competing and causing a blandness, perhaps, in the availability of cultural products to the detriment of people who are real creators. And just mention one particular initiative that I've become aware of in my own country, which is a website that's been set up to certify humanly created works. It's called Proudly Human, and it does have a very high notion as to what is a human created work that will not involve the use of AI except in insubstantial supportive ways, and it does set those things out in a number of ways. I think it's an interesting development that's taking place, and whether that's being picked up, I don't know, but it does lead me to a further observation that perhaps the answer is to think more of the people who read, who view and see things, that if they're put in possession of information concerning the authorship of the works they're looking at, viewing, the degree to which they have human authors, or they may have been assisted by AI, that may make the differentiation a much easier one to draw. It's just a suggestion.
Okay, thank you. And Angela, tell us about what your work is about as head of culture unit at the African Union. Yes, it works.
Thank you for the question. As you might be aware, the African Union is a policy-making institution. So in the area of culture, we do develop policies related to cultural and creative industries. We have a number of policies related to the creative economy, one of them being the AU Plan of Action on Cultural and Creative Industries, which was recently endorsed as a revised document. It was in 2023. The first plan was developed in 2008, basically to promote the cultural and creative industries on the continent. Borrowing from what a colleague there was saying, that prioritization of culture is lacking. This is what the continent is facing. We do develop policies, but then member states are encouraged to implement these policies, but due to lack of priority and resources, these policies, the implementation is quite slow. Also borrowing from what was mentioned with regards to having the involvement of creators in the policies that we develop. We do have a platform, a forum called the Pan-African Cultural Congress, where we are supposed to engage all artists from the continent to ensure that they make their contributions to the policy framework of the African Union. But then this also platform is a limited platform because of lack of resources and a lack of prioritization. Talking about AI, the African Union recently in 2024, together with many partners, developed the continental policy, continental strategy on AI, which is really a very important tool for us. But we hope that through support from forums like this one, and also with partners like WIPO and others, UNESCO, we can really popularize this instrument. The revised plan of action was done, but no inclusion was made on the AI issue. And we hope that in the coming years, we are going to be able to include something related to the AI into the AU Plan of Action on Cultural and Creative Industries. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, let's start with something that is just basic. Where do you think the energy and the time and the intelligence of people in this room should be focused on in the next 5 to 10 years in the field of the creative the creative sector in general and the copyright industry in particular. Who wants to pick on that one? Emma?
I think that you are doing already a great job, to be honest. And I know that you are really well informed, but also quite mobilized right now on AI. And I want to talk about that a bit, because I think that's something that we need to speak about more in our parliaments, whether European or national ones. Today, we are facing a crisis, which is that some big tech companies have won the narrative battle. They have won because sometimes people think that it's about a choice. Should we choose between innovation and culture? Should we choose between innovation and the state of law and the rule of law? I think that they are wrong. That artists today, that creators, that culture has always been, always, in the front line of innovation. And we need to remember that. And we need to remind everyone that we are not going to advance and to evolve as a society if we actually choose to, walk on the rights that we have built together. Today, we are facing two crises in terms of laws, and I think that we need to work on that. In the Parliament, we have done a report, which was led by Axel Voss, on copyright and generative AI. We need to say that it's not okay for companies to pay for chips, to pay for electricity, but not to pay artists for the work that they do every day. That what you are doing is not for free, that what you are doing is not just disposable for everyone, and that artists, that stakeholders, right holders, you need to be paid. That's the first thing to remind everyone. And I think that we need to continue to work on that. And I want to maybe say that I bring my full support to the proposal of law that is right now in the parliament in France. And I hope that it can be adopted. I'm saying that because I know that people right now are saying that it's, something that is incompatible with the rule that we have at the European level. I think that we completely don't care. And that we need parliaments to actually sometimes, bring on their forces and to say what is right and what is not. And I hope that it can then have an influence on policymakers everywhere.
By the way, excuse me, but I think the Conseil d'État said it was compatible with the European Union.
Exactly, but I know that other voices have been to the national parliaments in France and said otherwise. So yeah, I think you are completely right. I think also that then we need to say that on platforms and cultural platforms right now, such as Amazon, Spotify, other cultural platforms, there shouldn't be any synthesis content made by AI. And that's something really important. Today we are trying to cheat, some people are trying to cheat consumers, artists, by saying that synthesis content, I'm not going to call it, art or work, that this is the same as a song, as a book, as a movie. It is not the same, and culture is human. It is humanly created, and anything else is not content, is not culture, is cheating. And I think it's something that we need to work on in every parliament, and that's, I think, the fight for the next 10 years.
Thank you, Kevin, and probably Sylvie and Irini.
Absolutely agree with everything that Emma said. And we should remind ourselves and remind policymakers that copyright exists to encourage and reward human creativity. That's the only reason it exists in law. It carves out in law a concept of intellectual property that means humans can be encouraged to create and rewarded for their creation. AI creates nothing. AI generates mathematical probabilities. It's a desiccated calculating machine. It has no soul. It can produce a very convincing, but ultimately on its own unsatisfying facsimile of human creativity. But it doesn't create anything. It generates possibilities and probabilities. And therefore, using it as a tool is fine, but using it as a servant of creativity is fine. But if it becomes our master, then it's not fine. And in my view, anything ultimately that is purely generated through a machine or overwhelmingly generated through a machine should not be copyrightable, because copyright doesn't exist for that purpose. Now, of course, we need to drill down into the DNA of that and make sure that any AI models that are trained on human creativities, that we find the ways to reverse engineer that and to make sure that those whose creativity has been scraped, whether visual artists or musicians, whoever, ultimately can be rewarded. And there's absolutely no reason why that shouldn't be technically possible. So I would say, in answer to the question, I would say focus on, as creators, developing a collective voice together and being clear to policymakers what you want from policymakers. Do you want current copyright law enforced? Do you want it to be amended in order to take into account the challenges, existential, some of them, from AI? But the most important thing is to work together and have a collective voice, to row at the same rhythm, if you like, in the same boat when you're talking to policymakers. And ultimately, that's what policymakers and governments listen to, is when people speak to them with a clear voice. A lot of the big tech companies, the platforms, have a lot of resources, have a lot of money, but they don't have the soul and the collective moral and ethical purpose that you can bring to the conversation, because ultimately creators' rights are human rights, and we should emphasize that to policymakers.
Same question, what should this room focus on? And Sylvie also, maybe.
I think there are some very basic comments here that we should stick to. First of all, we need to protect human creativity in the age of machine-made content. That should be very, very clear and should have no exceptions, in my view. What does that mean? That means that sometimes there are differences between theory and practice. You cannot, on the one hand, say that AI-generated works are not protected by copyright, and at the same time register and administer such works. You cannot do that. We have to be very clear that AI-generated works are not protected by copyright because there is no human involvement. And in fact, we have guidelines from national copyright offices that says that. We have decisions from national courts. We have decisions from the Court of Justice of the European Union, etc., that are very clear as to what is protected by copyright. And then we're moving on to AI-assisted works. And I wanted to ask, how many creators here in this room know how much AI they can use as a tool without jeopardizing copyright protection? Because some people may say that I can use AI, but you see, I use it as a tool. But where do you draw the line? How easy it is to say that I have used 20%, 30% for that reason, for the other reason. So I think we need to assist creators, on the one hand, as to what use they can make of AI, which is not an easy task. And on the other hand, we need to train people in relation to how to sustain human creativity. So we need to ensure that people continue to develop creative skills rather than rely entirely on automated systems. So here is not only one stakeholder that needs to do something, but there are many stakeholders. Is the state, our copyright offices, there are CMOs, there is perhaps QIPO, there is the European Union, there are civil societies, there are many people that need to be engaged. Also, we need to remunerate, of course, human creativity, right? Ensure that artists can make a living out of it. And we also need to achieve transparency, because if we do not achieve transparency, transparency is not a vague term like that. We need to be very, very concrete. We need to move from theory into practice. How can one know how much of that work has been AI assisted? And how should the audience, the users, know that what they consume is not their real creation? We need to make them learn about that, because this is very, very important. So we should not only talk about legislative tools, perhaps should we change the legislation or whatever, but we should also be talking about tools, actual tools, how these tools should work in practice. Can, for example, the collecting society today check when someone comes over and says, well, this is my repertoire? Can it check whether this repertoire is AI generated or not? If it cannot check, then perhaps this is a theoretical question. We need to do something about that. And also something that is very important is preserve diversity. We need to prevent culture from becoming dominated by a small number of models, platforms, styles, or stereotypes. This is also a very, very important issue in my view.
Thank you. Sylvie.
Yes. So you understand from what I said earlier that WIPO is not the EU. The functioning of WIPO is based on consensus and on the only decision made and initiative taken by member states. So I represent the Secretariat, the permanent body. I'm not the Commission. We have no parliament. And so the decision-making process in WIPO is very difficult as long as 1, 2, 3 member states will oppose to any common work on the topic or will oppose putting on the table some serious discussion on, for example, are the treaties fit for purpose, the existing treaties, or do we need new normative work? As long as there is no consensus, we are just stuck. And in the meantime, the member states or group of member states, in the case of the EU, are taking decision, are taking normative steps. But the problem, as I said before, is that it does not go in the same direction. So we are really, really in a situation of a risk of fragmentation, which could even be really fighting one regulation contrary to another one. In the meantime, of course, we have jurisprudence. We have the decisions by the courts. But the decision by the courts, if you look at them, they are again fragmented. One is going in a direction, another one in another direction. It's not the same as in the period of time of the peer-to-peer. Remember, with the illegal downloading decision by the Supreme Court in the US, the very, very important decision, which was to be taken in Australia and which was taken some months later and putting on the table the principle of a secondary liability for the machine. Then, after, in countries where we are not functioning on jurisprudence but on law, of course, we took decision. The decision were going in the same direction as the main important decision taken by the Supreme Court. That is good when everything is going in the same direction, which is, again, not at all the case in our example of AI. So that's why we are taking the step of working on infrastructure, putting together the tech companies, the CMOs, and looking at technical solutions. But of course, we will not make the economy of a reflection on what would be needed. In the 1996 treaties, we did not, and Michael Fixor and his peers did not open the old treaties, did not reopen Berne. did not reopen Rome Convention. They just added a layer which was suited for the digital age. It was all the decision related to making available, communication to the public, technical protection measures, digital rights, all this was added. And it was added, and after the market could begin to be structured worldwide, because it has to be structured worldwide. We are not in this direction. I regret that, because I think we are losing time, and this time is exploited very well by the big tech companies.
What you're telling this room is that don't bother wasting energy at WIPO to try and get an AI and copyright treaty. That, if I read you well, is that what you said?
No, I didn't say that.
Well, that's what I read. You say, well, you cannot get consensus, so why even bother?
No, we have to make, not me, because in my position, but you have to lobby your member states, your governments, to go to Geneva and ask for a serious work on what would be missing to address in a correct way, in a compliant way, in an efficient way, all the issues that you are mercilessly identifying. But there is no solution but an international solution.
Sarah, I want to bring you in because it seems that to me that you've been working with rights holders and trying to get something about the resale rights through an international treaty, and for the moment what we have is zilch, nada, nothing.
That's right.
Is the resale right? No, sorry. The right exists in the Berne Convention. Sorry, Sam, you have to say that first.
Absolutely. No, I think what we've been working on is trying to work on encouraging implementation of the right. It's an optional right that countries have under the Berne Convention. So any treaty idea, I think, is a long way off. Can I just make a comment that follows on from what Sylvie said and also from what Irini has said? One thing that WIPO has done in the past is to develop recommendations as to principles, forms of soft law. And it might be following on from what Irini was saying, that the notion of human authorship is perhaps not fully understood among those who are practitioners, who are actually the creators, and perhaps guidelines as to what might be acceptable in terms of the use of AI. Some tools will be obviously quite acceptable, others won't be. But maybe that would be one way of promoting transparency in the cultural products that are being put on the marketplace that would differentiate them from the machine-produced works and products that are out there. I just have another comment about the machine-produced works. I shouldn't use the word works because that's contradiction. But if there is subject matter out there for which there's no identifiable human author, and it is created by AI, it sits there in an unprotected state. That's fine. I think that's a perfectly logical conclusion. But I am still trying to get my mind over the question, what does that actually mean? What are the implications of that? And is there any group or any person or entity that will try to claim rights in that material? Because that would, I think, be quite counterproductive. But the notion that there is a large body of material surging around there in the ether that is not human created, that is machine produced, has no identifiable human author. Is that a worry? Is that something we should be concerned about? And the fact that it's not protected by copyright?
We have 6 minutes left, which is 1 minute each to talk about. I want to, since we're celebrating 100 years for CISAC, let's not go into the next 50, but in the next 10, how do you see the environment shaping up? And in the next 10 years, and it goes back to the focus, but I'm more talking about the output. So you're working, for example, at the European Parliament on things. What kind of effect do you want to see on that? Same with the African Union, same in the British Parliament, and etc. So let's start with you, Angela.
Thank you. I think what we would like to see would be more engagement between, as we navigate in this new technology area, more engagement between creators and also tech companies, for instance. This will allow us to navigate better in this new era. And also, it was mentioned earlier today, the issue of enhanced legislative frameworks. I think they are very crucial for us to be able to protect the artistic works and also to allow that creators are protected in the environment. Thank you.
Emma?
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh,
I was just going to say, I should put on record, actually.
by the way, have you seen how he holds his mic?
Oh, sorry.
Like a real singer, you know?
I was just going to say, I should put on record thanks to the president of CISAC, Bjorn Ulvaeus, for his intervention last year in the UK, which helped, I think, head off the UK government from going on a pathway which I think was the wrong pathway in relation to opt-out and AI and so on. And that shows that it is possible, if you through organisations like this, to actually really make a difference and change the pathway. And that's been really important in getting the UK government to refocus on what it really wants to do here. Because actually governments are in a dilemma, and we need to understand that. The tech companies and the developers of AI come along and say, you're going to miss the boat on growth here. You're going to miss the opportunities that this incredible new technology opens up for you. And by the way, it's happening anyway elsewhere in the world, whether that's in China or in America, whatever else it is. So unless you're careful, you're going to miss the boat. We've got to remake the argument that actually economic growth is underpinned by a very strong IP regime. And without a very strong IP regime, everybody suffers. By the way, including those people who make new proprietary software and new proprietary technological developments. Somewhere down the line, they're happy to infringe everyone else's copyright, but if you try stealing their software, they'll soon make a big fuss about it and realize they need the protection of IP law. So I think over the next 10 years, as someone said earlier, going back to the basic arguments and making sure that the fundamentals still apply is crucial, but keep engaging with government and keep using the voice in order to make sure that governments can hear that there's more to this than just an exciting new technology that's going to suddenly produce mythical economic growth out of nothing.
Emma?
Yes, your question is really broad, so maybe I would like to say, what principles maybe can, guide us in the next 10 years, because that's the time that you have set.
I accept the amendment.
It's okay. I think that, we are actually talking about a lot of issues today that are creating crisis in the industry, in culture in general, and as I said earlier, for democracy also. I think that we need to remind ourselves why we are doing all of this and why, obviously, does copyright or author's right exist? Why do we care about culture, and what is a principle that we should go back to? And that's where maybe I will talk about both cultural sovereignty, but also about cultural exception, which are words that we are using less and less, but I think are becoming more and more actually important in the democratic debate. We can talk about AI, but we can also talk about discoverability at a time of, streaming services that are obviously monopolistic today. And I think that today, saying that we care about this cultural exception because we still think that culture is still not like anything else in the market is something that we need to get back to. That was the tradition of both French law, but also of European regulation. And I think that it's something that we should not back down from. The pressure right now in the European Parliament is actually to tear down the regulations that we have built. It's about, obviously, regulations for culture, but also for authors' rights. And I think that in the next 10 years, what I would like for all of us to actually do together, because I don't really believe in this separation between stakeholders and policymakers. I think that we need to remind ourselves that the moment is for all of us to be more ambitious, all of us. We cannot only resist, to the big tech companies and to all of these attacks from the big tech. We need to say what can be done in a more ambitious way. And that means working for, limiting market concentration in music and culture. It means making sure that the value is shared better for artists and for, obviously, producers, but that it is something that we can do. It is saying that buyout contracts should be forbidden, and not only, in a small line at the end of a regulation, but that we need to work on that, and we need to say that culture is human. But all of that, for me, is actually the same battle, is the battle to say that culture is something quite central, and if we really want for our democracies actually to still survive, but also to thrive, we need to say that culture is a priority and not something that, can be sacrificed on the altar of innovation or on deregulation.
Well, I think you got the votes from the room. So very quickly, Sylvie, Irini, and Sam, whatever principles or you think should prevail.
What I would expect to see in, a few years would be for us to have reached a common understanding of what is protected and how creators and right holders are remunerated. We have to do a lot of work as to how this understanding will look like. Will it be guidelines? Will it be soft law? Will it be legislation? Will it be tools, or perhaps a bit of everything? But we need to do a lot more work on that understanding to be common. And I think this is the huge challenge. Not so much to the understanding, because we all agree that right holders need to be remunerated, but we need to do a lot more work on common, on that this understanding is common. And also, we need, I think, to bear in mind that this is something that creators cannot do alone. This is something that CMOs cannot do alone. We need many stakeholders to engage: states, societies, civil societies, and also competition authorities. Because if we have these platforms and these systems, in fact, concentrated in the hands of the few, that alone also creates, in my view, a problem.
Thank you. Sylvie, or you want to?
Well, I agree with all that Irini has said. We should also bear in mind history, that there have been technological challenges to authors' rights right from the start. Certainly the history of the Berne Convention illustrates that, and the most recent example when change occurred was at the time of the internet treaties that Dr. Fickshaw was so closely involved with. It's easy to panic and to say we need a new paradigm, but I think there are ways forward, and that's what I think CISAC has been doing, and WIPO, and I certainly fully commend them for doing so.
Well, 10 years is very short. So in 10 years, if we could legally qualify what are the new features brought by AI, and we need to work. It's not easy, but qualify and identify what kind of new concept, such as remuneration, the one that we invented, that our predecessors invented for the 96 treaties, perhaps there is a need of new concept to put on the new realities. And if we can, all the community of cultural industries, creative community, if we can agree on that, then try with all the force, all what you represent, to ask the various governments to take decision and to go at the table of negotiation. And I'm not sure, sorry colleagues, but I'm not sure that a soft law will be enough. Because the tech companies, soft law for them, perhaps it will be nothing. So perhaps we would need a hard law, but we will need to take time. It's hard work, but we need to begin all together, this difficult work.
Okay, the very, very last word then, Emma.
Yeah, I just wanted to jump on that because I think that you need to remember that you are actually really strong. Like in the debate that we are having right now, we are obviously talking about everything that we should do collectively to protect you. But I think that you should remind every policymakers, and sometimes they forget, and I know that they forget, that you are actually a strength everywhere in the world. You represent workers, you represent money, you represent power. And I was yesterday actually presenting my report on cultural policies in Europe. And I was talking with an Italian colleague, and I said to him, because he was really hesitant about whether or not we should make culture a priority, I said to him, I went for the holidays in Florence recently, and I saw in Florence all these masterpieces, Michelangelo's, Da Vinci, everywhere. And I said to him, that is no chance that this happened there. It was a political decision back then to make Florence a superpower. It was the Medicis, And whether your children are listening to K-pop or they are watching American movies or Indian movies, at the end of the day, it's also a political decision to make sure that we are watching, listening, or seeing culture that is human-made and that is respectful of workers and artists. And I think that if we really want to be powerful as democracies, we need to make sure that the culture that we are allowing to be produced is respectful of the state of law. And this is really an important issue for all of us.
Well, thank you so much. And so these are the final words.